Okay, so I suggest we get started now. Looking at my colleague Sonia, if we're all good. Okay. Okay, so welcome everyone. I'm Béatrice Godefroy, Public Policy Engagement Director at Climate Action Accelerator. And I'm here with my colleague Sonia Schmidt, the head of the solutions team at Climate Action Accelerator, to moderate this webinar on the principle-based approach to offsetting. Why does it matter? So quite a topic, quite technical, but also very strategic as well when it comes to emissions reduction. So before delving right into the topic, just a few practical information, if you can just pass the slide, Sonia. So we'll have an hour and a half for this conversation. After we do the welcomes and of course introducing the topic and the problem set, we'll have the chance to hear from fantastic experts and speakers on the topic, and have a little bit of time for the panel discussion with them. And then at 1:30, so in about an hour, we're going to have 30 minutes for Q&A with the audience, and we'll try to wrap it by 2. Just practically speaking, for you to know, the webinar is recorded. That's our practices at Climate Action Accelerator. And we'll make the replay available on YouTube, on our website as well. You see the link on the screen. In terms of how the webinar is going to go, please keep your audio and video off at all times, as always. We'll have, as you see now, the possibility to do a Q&A in the second part of the webinar. So you can either write your questions in the chat, in the Q&A section, or you can raise your hand and then we'll give you the floor. So both options are workable for us. In terms of the language, so the webinar is going to be it's going to be fully actually in English, but we have translation to French. La traduction en français est disponible. You can see here how to activate subtitles on Zoom. Pour activer les sous-titres sur Zoom, you can click on Show Captions or Afficher les sous-titres in the bottom bar. You see everything on the screen. And then you choose the language that you want. Vous pouvez choisir le langage une fois que vous avez cliqué sur cette flèche. Voilà, with this, I'm going to just take 1 minute to introduce the Climate Action Accelerator, and then we'll dive into the conversation with our speakers. For those who don't know us, the Climate Action Accelerator is a non-for-profit initiative. We're based in Geneva, and we are now nearly 4 years old. And our goal is actually to mobilize a critical mass of organizations, especially in high social trust sectors such as aid, health, and higher education and research. So we want to mobilize these organizations around the world with the goal to scale up implementation of climate solutions and accelerate climate action. Our framework is very much the framework of the planetary boundaries, as well as the Paris Agreement goal of reducing our emissions and keeping global warming well below 2 degrees. So we help those organizations from those sectors to go through a radical transformation process, both when it comes to strengthening their resilience and to developing emissions reduction plans and implementing them. We empower those organizations, but those organizations become champions as well. So one specific thing in our approach, for those who don't know us, is we really want to encourage the members which are on board our initiative, the partners, to champion and to become ambassador of this approach for effective emissions reduction, and then to contribute to amplifying this approach. We also built a community of practice, of actions with our members and beyond, because we very much consider all this knowledge that we share on climate action is very much to be considered as global good and as very essential actually to scaling up the deployment of climate solutions. Okay, so you see here the list of our partners from the humanitarian sector and health sector, as I mentioned. And on the next slide, yeah, and so that was for the introduction of Climate Action Accelerator. My colleagues and I are at your disposition if you want to know more about our work. But I think it's now very much the time to delve into the topic. So I'll just take a couple of minutes speaking under the control of our distinguished panelists and experts to just walk you through why actually we are proposing today to discuss this issue. What's the problem set? So of course, we're speaking of offsetting, so of emission reduction or removal resulting from an action outside an organization boundaries, being used to counterbalance residual emissions. So basically, we're discussing offsets which are by nature a way to direct financial streams to fund projects which are climate and environmentally friendly. Which can have which can be considered as, so it can be considered as a climate tool. It actually was created over 20 years ago, and mainly actually we're speaking of projects which are about planting trees or about supporting transition to renewable energy or about technical or technological projects. We'll hear much more about the nature of this project with our speakers just later. So what's the issue in directing funding streams to climate-friendly projects? Well, the issue is around the practices of organizations with this very offsetting and how the practices are very heterogeneous. They have a variety of practices which are unfortunately not aligned with recognized standards. You do have indeed organizations like Science-Based Target Initiatives, Carbon Cat Net Zero Initiative, Oxford Principles for Net Zero Aligned Offsetting, the UN High-Level Expert Group, etc., you name it. You have a few very recognized organizations who have contributed to establish a practice on emissions reduction, which is if we want to actually contribute to contain global warming in the window of time that we have, we absolutely need to maximize emission reductions to achieve our climate goals. So in practice, it means if we look at offsetting and if we look at concrete emissions reduction actions, we need to prioritize emissions reduction actions. And we need to of course, offsets do exist, but they shouldn't be counted as reductions towards emissions reduction targets. So basically, they shouldn't be counted in carbon accounting. Because concretely, buying offsets doesn't compensate for the volumes of emission that you actually put into the atmosphere at a specific point in time. So those practices, again, are very heterogeneous when it comes to how organizations, private companies use them today. We'll hear much more about that from our speakers. The risk is actually with using offsets versus, if I may say, versus emission reductions activities is delaying emissions reduction, which is, of course, what we don't want when we see how urgent emissions reduction efforts are to try and contain global warming. So our position at Climate Action Accelerator is just something very classic, again, based on this recognized standard. But of course, by no means we want to say that if offsets are being purchased, that offsets shouldn't be purchased, but that if they are, they should be using very high integrity criteria and going for offsets which are appropriately priced. So I think what this topic will take us to explore today is very much the concept of carbon neutrality, what it means or doesn't mean, whether it's relevant or not at the level of an organization, and versus the contribution to global neutrality. So you can see on the screen the notes and the papers that we've written on the topic. They're all available on our website. General background note, the illusion of carbon offsets in achieving our goals, and a more specific paper, policy analysis from the humanitarian sector perspective and the practices of the UN in terms of offsetting. But we will hear more again on that during that conversation. So with this, maybe I'm going to go quickly through a last quote that you see on the screen, which is from the high-level expert group I was mentioning, and I think it says a lot to help frame the question. Too many non-state actors are currently engaging in a voluntary market where low prices and lack of clear guidelines risk delaying urgent near-term emission reductions needed to avoid the worst impact on climate change. So hoping this gives you all a sense of what we will discuss here today. Thank you so much to all participants which are online and have joined us already. And with the next slide, I think it's time to introduce our very esteemed speakers. We're very excited actually by the speakers who are with us today and very much looking forward to hearing from them. So we are very lucky to have with us Inigo Wyburd. Inigo is a policy expert in global carbon markets with a particular focus on the voluntary carbon market. And he's working at Carbon Market Watch, a leading watchdog organization, where he keeps a very close eye on the VCM and is striving to bring integrity and fairness through science-driven advocacy. And prior to joining Carbon Market Watch, Inigo worked in carbon markets for project developer and sustainability consultancy in London. So welcome, Inigo. Thank you so much for being with us today. We are extremely lucky as well to have Sascha Nick with us, in spite of the fact that he's teaching us at 2 p.m. So we really have to be very careful about timekeeping today. So Sascha Nick is a business school professor and scientific director of the Diploma in Sustainable Business. His BSL course, SDG Explorer, is actually being selected as best practice by UN SDSN. So congratulations for that. Professor Nick is also a researcher in sustainability transition at EPFL and a lecturer at EPFL and UNIL. And he has so much experience in helping companies, in creating companies, in working for very high-profile firms as well on sustainability that I can't name them all here, but we are extremely happy to have you with us, Sascha. Welcome, welcome. And finally, I'm very glad to be welcoming Jacob Goldberg, who is an investigative reporter at the New Humanitarian. Jacob was previously editor-in-chief at the New Narrative and managing editor at Coconuts Yangon. And he received journalism awards from the Society of Publishers in Asia in 2017 and 2020, and from Amnesty International Thailand in 2021. And his work has been cited in many occasions, including at the UK Parliament and by Brazilian prosecutors. So thank you so much, Jacob, for being with us. I understand all the way from Asia, right? Okay, so with this, I'll be turning to Inigo first to take a few minutes to help us set the scene and understand better what offset are, what is the voluntary carbon markets, and really delve much more and certainly much better than I did into the problem set. Over to you, Inigo.
Mute. Hello, how is everyone? Can everybody see my screen?
Yes, it looks yeah, looks like it.
Second, sorry.
Now it's perfect.
Yeah, well.
Great.
Yeah, it works. Okay, amazing. Yes, thank you so much, Beatrice, and Sonia for allowing me to come here. It's an absolute pleasure. Yeah, so I'll just go over a little bit of an overview of carbon markets and carbon credits. It is quite a technical subject, so I tried to abbreviate as much as possible and try to simplify as much as possible. But yes, there is quite a lot of technicalities with regards to it. And so, yeah, apologies if there are some acronyms that I use off the tongue and I'm very used to. So, yep, just straight dive into it. So what are carbon credits? So carbon credits represent 1 ton of CO2 equivalent, either removed or reduced, or they should represent that amount. There are a lot of different types of carbon credits. They abide by different rules and by different methodologies created by different standards. I would say that there's 3 main types. There is reduction credits. So these are projects that lower or prevent CO2 from being emitted into the atmosphere, such as like renewable energy projects, like your wind, solar, hydropower projects. Then you have removal credits. These are ones that actually remove CO2 from the atmosphere and store it. And there are natural sinks, so natural projects, like if you plant a tree or a forest in a specific location, and it absorbs CO2 from the atmosphere. and keeps it stored for a period of time, or you have other schemes like technological methods, like direct air carbon capture and storage, which is basically a form of technology where it is implemented in a location and it absorbs CO2, and then it puts that CO2 deep underground into geological structures, normally like old oil basins or old oil uh, chambers. And then you have the third type, which is avoidance credits. These are prevent potential emissions that would have otherwise potentially been emitted into the atmosphere. And so, for example, forest conservation projects, where they would be maybe at risk of being deforested because of agricultural practices or timber harvesting or X, Y, and Z. Um, so that's just a little bit of a summary of the different types of credits. Then different types of markets. We have both compliance markets and we also have voluntary carbon markets. Um, Compliance markets are regulated national, international schemes or transnational mechanisms under governmental regulation or intergovernmental bodies like the United Nations. So under the United Nations, we have what is called the Article 6 mechanism of the Paris Agreement that allows countries to be able to trade emissions to be able to hit their or reach their emission reduction targets. Article 6, without having to go into too much detail, is split into two. There is Article 6.2, and there's also Article 6.4. Oh, sorry. Yeah. So Article 6.2 is country to country. So countries are allowed to be able to trade bilaterally with another country with regard emissions. They trade what is called international transferred mitigation outcomes. Right now, certain amount of transactions have taken place, but very few. So that's getting into fruition slowly. And then we have what is called Article 6.4. It's a carbon market more for companies and individuals where they can buy carbon credits. Very, very simply put. And then you have national schemes. So you have, for example, Australia has a carbon market of itself, which is regulated by the government there. Or you also have other ways like sector-specific obligations as a compliance metric. So, for example, CORSIA. So CORSIA is the carbon offsetting and reduction scheme for international aviation. And so basically, the airline sector is allowed to use certain types of carbon credits to be able to offset their emissions because there's no alternative to aviation fuel. And then you have like a specific national context, like for example, in Colombia, where you have carbon tax on the implemented on the combustion of fossil fuels within companies. And so companies are subject to this tax, which is 5%. And then, they can use carbon offsets to mitigate these tax liabilities. This is very, very simply put, but those are the few different types. And then you have voluntary, which is an unregulated space. I'm not sure if I'm able to change screen. There we go. Okay. Then when it comes to the voluntary carbon market, it's a private sector-led institution without overarching regulation from a government. It came forth through the shortcomings of compliance markets, such as the CDMs, the Clean Development Mechanism. It's a mechanism prior to the Article 6 mechanism, and corporate social responsibility strategies. The rules and the requirements within the VCM are determined by the actors in the VCM themselves. It is not a central market. It doesn't have a central marketplace, so it's decentralized. So it doesn't have an authority or governing body which oversees transactions, fix a price or credit standards. Unlike compliance markets, there is no defined market price as a result, so no standardization, and prices dependent on project type, the quality of the project, the age of the project, so the vintage, the amount of demand, X, Y, and Z. And then this leads me on to the lack of homogeneity within carbon credits. There's so many different types. So you have renewable credits, forestry credits, community building credits. So, and these all influence the price as well. And then when it comes to the structure of the VCM, there is a lot of different actors, as I mentioned before. These include independent certifiers, so like your standards, which are the ones that create the methodology and the requirements for project developers, the ones that are going to use those requirements to create a project. and abide by those rules. To make sure that the project developer is abiding by those rules, you have what is called an auditor or a third-party auditor, or what we also renown them as being a validation and verification bodies. And these ones evaluate whether these projects are actually following those requirements by the standards. Then you've got the trading of the credits. The credits are traded by intermediaries, so brokers and traders in the secondary market, and facilitate the transaction between credits from the supply side, so where the projects are created, creating the credits, to the demand side, so what buyers are purchasing the credits for. And there's many other actors, but I won't for this session, won't elaborate on those ones. And then you can see this as a good, sorry for if it's cut out on the side, I should have restricted it a bit more, but yes, this is just a little bit of a very simply put way that the market works. And here is a little bit of an overarching what of different actors which are involved in the markets are. Good. Okay, so then looking a little bit more of a deep dive into the VCM and what's happened in recent years, right? So in 2021, we had a huge increase in the amount of issuances of carbon credits. This graph shows analysis from MSCI, which is a data platform for analysis of the 11 most popular standards for creating methodologies for the projects. And it shows the difference between the different project types when it comes to issuance volume. In recent years, so last 2 years, there's been a huge amount of skepticism hitting the market, both from media and civil society. And this has led on to there being a really rapid decrease in issuances. From 2021 to 2023, we saw around a 15% decrease in issuances. So a decrease in market confidence. Then a little bit of a snapshot into the different types of projects or the most popular project types by issuance. This is analysis of the 4 most popular standards, okay, and the ones that are creating the most issued credits. And we can see that forestry and land use are creating the most credits, specifically avoided deforestation projects. So this refers to REDD+ projects, the ones that are like forest conservation projects. And then the second most popular, as you can see, is renewable energy, with specifically wind and hydro being the most popular. Yeah, just a little bit of a hone in on the specific standards, as I mentioned before. These 4, so Verra Gold Standard, Verified American Carbon Registry, and Climate Action Reserve, are the most popular standards on the VCM, so they're producing the most credits currently. And as you can see, Verra is the most dominant one currently, with maybe over 70% of issuances currently on the market. Then just a little bit of a like basic understanding around what rules a carbon credit needs to abide by. So they need to be real. So they need to represent exactly what a ton of CO2 is, and therefore they need to be accurately estimated to make sure that that's actually happening. They need to be additional, so they need to be having an additional impact on the planet. So without going into too much technicality with it, would the project have happened if it hadn't been from the revenue generated from the carbon credits? Then I think that term is going to be elaborated more when Sascha speaks. And then permanence is the CO2 is removed from the atmosphere, okay, and then it's going to be stored. And so how long is it going to be stored for? Is it going to be stored for an equivalent amount of time for that CO2 is in the atmosphere, which is multiple centuries to millennia? And is that going to be equivocal? It needs to be verifiable. So as I mentioned before, is it being verified by a third-party auditor that is making sure that the project is abiding by the requirements and the methodology set out by the standard? And the rights aspects of things. Are communities involved? Are safeguards being abided by? Are they taken into consideration? Is proper consultation? So if I'm implementing a project on someone's land, am I actually consulting the people that live there appropriately? And is the revenue generated from the carbon credits actually getting to those communities on the ground? Lastly, there is a range of different international frameworks, which guide how carbon credits should be used for corporations to be able to reach their climate targets and their climate goals. Beatrice mentioned before the Science Based Target Initiative. So the Science Based Target Initiative has the corporate net zero standard. It's a global body enabling organizations to be able to set out greenhouse gas emission climate aligned targets. It was set up by the CDP, so it's the Carbon Disclosure Project, as well as the United Nations Global Compact, World Resources Institute, and WWF. Then you have Race to Zero, it's a UN-led coalition aiming for global net zero emissions by 2050. Then you got the CDP, as I mentioned, the Carbon Disclosure Project, which is a global environmental reporting platform for improving environmental integrity and transparency with regards to targets, and then Greenhouse Gas Protocol, which is for global standard for emission reduction accounting. Also set up by the WRI, so the World Resources Institute. Then you have integrity initiatives. So integrity initiatives are two in the market currently. It's the ICVCM and the VCMI, so Integrity Council for Voluntary Carbon Markets and Voluntary Carbon Market Integrity Initiative. These are different. They're independent bodies that focus on enhancing credibility and integrity within voluntary carbon markets, pushing for higher quality standards and pushing for, better criteria for carbon credits as of now. That is the end of the very quick snapshot into what the voluntary carbon market is. I apologize if it was highly technical, but yeah.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Inigo. It's actually remarkable that you managed to explain in such a clear way so many technical concepts in 10 minutes. Thank you so much. As you have seen, we already have questions in the chat and also one person raised their hand. We'll get back to those questions after we have heard from the other speakers. So thank you so much. Now that we have heard about the concepts and the frameworks, let's delve into how they are being used actually, and especially by companies. So Sascha, I'm turning to you. You've made an impressive amount of work on the question, and including most recently, you've published an article in Nature. You have co-authored an article published in Nature on the demand for low quality offsets by major companies, undermining climate integrity of the voluntary carbon market. So we're very happy to hear your perspective and to hear more about your research on the topic. Over to you.
Sure, with great pleasure. Actually, before even sharing the slides, I would just like to comment briefly on what Inigo said. You have seen that in 2021, 22, there was a huge spike in these credits until doubts started coming in, and now it's a little bit down from the peak. So we actually analyzed in our paper precisely these 3 key years: 2021, 2022, and 2023. So this is what I would like to share with you. So before we go any further, can you see the text and can you read it?
Yeah, perfect.
Okay, wonderful. So let me. This is the paper, and if perhaps we can share the link to the paper in the chat. If anybody wants to read it, this is just the title, but here is actually the full text and a lot of detail. I will just show a very small extract of some of the main findings here in the time we have. It's 1:02. I will try to keep it to about 12 minutes. So first of all, what we find in the summary, and then I will give you a bit more detail, is that the 20 biggest corporate buyers of offsets are buying junk. To be very blunt about that, low quality, cheap offsets, we think that 87% of what they're buying will have no impact whatsoever on the climate. A large number comes from just 2 areas, which is deforestation and renewable energy. Both are problematic for different reasons. And 80% of the 20 companies, 16 out of 20, are buying the cheapest junk they can buy on the market. And very interestingly, they do not meet basically any kind of proper quality standards that we will go into some detail. 97.5% is avoidance, and 2.5% is removal. And we will see also strategically that this does not make very much sense. So the main finding is the last sentence. The market is messed up, but the big companies are not victims of a messed up market. The market is messed up because this is what the companies are demanding. Okay, so that's the whole thing in a nutshell. And now in the remaining 9 minutes, I'll try to provide a little bit more detail so this makes sense to you. So first of all, these are the 20 companies we looked into. If you just look at the top two, they together emit, they actually bought credits for more than the Swiss annual emissions. So this is huge. And these two companies together represent a fifth of the market. They have very, very much market power, contrary to project developers who are small and atomized. So there is a clear disproportion of market power here. And 95%, 19 out of 20, use these fake credits to claim that they're doing fantastic climate action. So there's quite a bit of greenwashing there. Okay, in detail, what we did, we analyzed, first of all, by mitigation approach, what is avoidance, what is removal. And then we looked into the quality criteria, the quality assessment that Inigo was speaking about types of project and relative risks, age, price, and country of implementation for renewables, which we will go into detail. In detail, this is what we did. In the first two steps, we actually created a new proprietary from various sources, we actually created a new public database, which you can download from our supplementary material if anybody is interested, where we actually show this data. It's very, very interesting. And then the steps 3, 4, and 5 are an iterative approach to analyze what we found in this data. And based on what we found, we actually adjusted the methodology and reanalyzed again. So first of all, the avoidance versus removal question, you can see that this proportion over the 4 years has barely changed. And on average, it's 97.5% and 2.5% for the removals. And there are slight variations among the companies, but of course, there's a huge dominance of avoidance credits. In terms of risk, light gray, which you can barely see here, is low risk. This is medium risk, and this very dark, which dominates the picture, is high risk. And we classify this based on criteria from the Stockholm Environmental Institute, where we just apply a certain number of criteria, and we conclude that on balance of evidence, 87% of these credits cannot be trusted. Let's go into a little bit more detail. So this is a similar breakdown. Again, you have all 20 companies plus a summary line for all companies at the bottom. Green is forestry and land use. Yellow is renewable energy. And then you have a number of others. So you can see the clear dominance of yellow and green across all companies, with just a handful of companies doing other things. Deforestation is 43%. Renewable energy is 36%. If we go into a bit more detail about the age of offsets, and by the way, I'm not going into too much detail now because I want to give you an overview. But if anyone really wants to know in detail how we determine that these are the high-risk projects and why they are high-risk and higher risk than others, etc., please ask specific questions so I don't bore you with general details and I can specifically answer what you're really interested in. Okay, the next issue is age of offsets. So a project can start in a year, let's say 2008. The whole project starts in 2008. You can retire some projects in the year 2008. You can retire some projects in 2009, some credits, sorry, in 2010, and so on. You can, of course, not retire any credits before the project starts, which is why the upper diagonal is empty. Now, we are interested in projects that have started recently because they tend to have more better management, more careful, stricter criteria. All of these criteria for what is real and what is not has significantly changed over the past years. And we think that at the very least, we need to have projects that have started 2016 or later with very recent vintage years. And this is actually a very weak criterion. This is used by Corsia. Corsia is one of the bigger greenwashing schemes, but even they have this kind of level of minimum equality. So if you're outside of this box, we cannot really count this as credible at all. But actually more recent criteria, I'll get to that in a second, require 2021. So you can see this is vanishingly small. Let's continue. Again, just ask me later if you're really interested in anything in more detail. But the Article 6.4 of the Paris Agreement that Inigo mentioned requires that mitigation activities that qualify have started in 2021 or later, which has also been taken over by SBTI. And of course, some of our projects, we have also analyzed the year 2020, which of course couldn't comply with that. But 21, 2, and 3 could have, and they are not. It is completely vanishingly small. Okay, I continue with this. Here we look at the price. So now we are up to the third quality criterion. There is quite a strong correlation between price and quality. And here we see the weight. For example, Telstra is buying 100% of its credits from the very lowest price quintile. This company here, Hookhems, is buying from the second quintile, mid-low. So it's still low price, but not the very bottom one. So if we look into that, 14 plus 2 out of 20 buy a vast majority of their credits from the lowest quintiles. This highest quintile does not guarantee, but it makes it much more likely that the credits are better. The fourth criterion is a country of implementation for renewable energies. Now, the two main registries, Gold Standard and VCS, have two criteria, the first test and the second test. So the first test is that the credit should come from a least developed country. That's one of the 19 countries that really do not have any significant renewable energy infrastructure. So any project in that area makes a difference. And that accounts for 0.2% of the credits in our sample. And then we have a number of as a second additional criterion that will come from a lower income or lower middle income country where the penetration rate of renewable energy is less than 5%. That means we assume that when a country like India reaches 5% penetration of renewables, then there is a whole infrastructure. There is policy, there are people who know how to do that. There are some kind of supporting mechanisms, and then the additionality becomes very, very questionable. These are weak criteria, but you still see that the vast majority of our credits do not reach that. These years here in gray simply shows year by year from 2005 to 2023 when a country has changed status. So for example, India, Guatemala, Indonesia, or China. For example, China had less than 5% of renewables up until about 2011. And after that, so any renewable energy project, while it had 1%, 2% renewable in 2005, you could argue you could at least have some benefit of the doubt. But in 2012, there is no benefit of the doubt. So this here in white can be excluded. I hope you understand this. If it's still not clear, please ask questions. I will now come to the last two slides and summarize so I keep my timing and you're not all upset with me. For quality indicators, so what we try to do, we have 4 quality indicators for renewable energy, and we have 3 quality indicators for all the others, because this least developed country that we had on the previous page, that applies only to renewable energy. And we see that for non-renewable energy offsets, we have an average score of 1 out of 3. And for renewable energy, we have 0.8 out of 4. So this is not extraordinary. Half of the criteria meet half of the projects meet 0 criteria, and another 24% meet 1 out of 4. And that means only the last quarter meets 2 or more. And as the very last summary of what I wanted to say in this introduction is that this is company by company. So this is the same chart as we had before, but in the previous chart, we put them here like this side by side. And here we try to break it down company by company. And you can see here, no company buys anything that comes close to 3 or 4. Companies are in the best case at 1 and 2, but most of it is actually white, half of it. And here it's slightly better for the non-renewable energy projects, with 1 company buying all of their credits of a certain quality. But everything else is really quite bad. So I summarize in 1 sentence. This market level aggregated analysis that started being published a bit over a year ago in The Guardian, which was also based on scientific research. This is real. The market really is messed up, but it's not messed up by act of God. It is messed up as a result of the biggest companies actively doing greenwashing. So this is what we have proven in our paper. If you have more questions, please ask them afterwards, and please read the paper. There's much more detail in the paper. And if you really want to understand it, please download the supplementary data where you will actually find the actual projects.
Thank you so much, Sascha. This is very strong evidence indeed that carbon offsets are not being used as an effective climate tool. I think it's the least we can say. So of course it raises so many questions. I'll keep my questions and those of the rooms for just after we hear from Jacob. I'm turning to you, Jacob, to help give us the example of what those behavior in terms of offsetting mean for a very critical actor, which is the UN. As I mentioned earlier, at Climate Action Accelerator, we do some work with humanitarian actors on effective emissions reduction practices and how to embark a critical mass of actors to turn the humanitarian sector as a low carbon industry, if I may say. But the UN represents 50% of the humanitarian sector. And what we found reading your paper and investigating further is that they are not really, for now, actually walking the talk in terms of their behavior with regards to offsetting. So over to you for introducing us this very concrete example from your investigation.
Thank you, Beatrice, and thank you, Inigo, and thank you, Sascha, for your presentations. And thanks everyone here for taking an interest in my work. I worked on this investigation for about a year, so it's nice to be able to talk about it. Can you all hear me? And can you see the presentation?
Yes, perfectly.
Great. Oh. Okay, so yeah, I'm Jacob Goldberg. I work at the New Humanitarian. I'm a journalist. I'm not a climate expert. So if I misspeak, particularly on something technical, please forgive me and feel free to correct me in the Q&A section of this conversation. So this project looking into the UN's claims of climate neutrality actually started before, it has its roots before I joined the New Humanitarian. I joined in 2022. And the previous year, some colleagues of mine, they set out to try to quantify the aid sector's carbon footprint. I wasn't involved in that investigation, but there were a few lines in it, a few findings in that investigation that became relevant to my project. And those findings were, one, that the UN considers itself to be mostly carbon neutral because it buys carbon credits, and 2, that it buys its carbon credits from the Clean Development Mechanism, the CDM. And you can see in this image just a screenshot from one of the UN's recent Greening the Blue reports, where they claim to be 97% climate neutral. They've claimed to be upwards of 90% climate neutral every year since 2018, I believe. So that means that they're claiming, despite their very important work and very energy intensive work around the world, that they haven't had any impact or almost no impact on the climate and putting nothing significant into the atmosphere. That's a big claim. That's why we set out to investigate it. So our question was, is the UN really climate neutral? And at first, when I started looking into it, I was thinking maybe it's not really worth looking into because work has already been done on the CDM. There was a German study that found that 85% of the credits offered through the CDM had a low likelihood of reducing emissions. So why do I need to look at the UN specifically if we already know that they get most of their credits through the CDM, then they're probably not high quality credits. But I wanted to give the UN the benefit of the doubt. Maybe they buy only the highest quality credits that are available through the CDM. Maybe they select them very carefully. And if that's the case, then maybe they really are canceling out all of their emissions. So before I set out to answer that question, whether they really do select their credits carefully, I thought it was important to mention, why does it matter? The UN is not one of the biggest emitters of greenhouse gases in the world. You saw the list of companies that Sascha just presented. The UN's not on there. Most of climate change is caused by a small number of companies that put out 70% of the world's emissions. The UN's not on that list. But we still thought it was important to look into because of the UN's leadership role in helping countries slow the effects of climate change, helping countries lower their emissions. And then we asked one of our sources said, I do think it matters what the UN does. The UN is effectively overseeing the world's effort to address the climate problem. So that was enough of a justification to really analyze what the UN was doing. And that led to this story. It was done in partnership with some reporters at Manga Bay and a freelancer, Leopold Salzenstein. We all worked together for many months. And here's what we did. We asked every UN agency, each agency has a sustainability focal point, and they hold data on what credits their agency is buying to offset their emissions. So reached out to dozens of them and asked them, can you send me your list of credits? And that list usually contains the names of the projects or a number that you can use to link to the name of the project and the number of credits they bought from that project. 33 UN entities provided data. 15 didn't respond, or they said they couldn't provide that any data. And so I took all of that data and I did something very similar to what Sascha did, but a very low tech, non-specialized version of it. I wish that I could have just given you the data and you could have done the report, because it would have come out a lot clearer, and I could have saved a lot of time it took to actually study this topic. But I'm glad I did it. Maybe you can still have the data if you want it. But here are the findings after putting it all into a very rough spreadsheet and figuring out the patterns in which credits the UN was buying. First of all, even before looking at the credits themselves, we asked them if they select high quality credits. They said they don't. Many agencies said that they procure their credits through one specific UN entity called the UNFCCC, and it procures them on various agencies' behalf. And UNFCCC gets them through this organization called the Adaptation Fund. And the Adaptation Fund assigns credits from the CDM to buying UN entities randomly. They don't select them at all. So to further give the UN the benefit of the doubt, okay, they're selected randomly, and they don't go out of their way to choose the highest quality credits, but maybe the highest quality credits ended up in their portfolio anyway. So that means we need to look at what these credits actually were. And out of the out of the 5 criteria, Inigo, that you mentioned earlier, we focused on one, additionality, because it seemed to be the easiest to explain and the easiest to just use to quickly glance at a project and figure out whether it was likely to reduce emissions. So after gathering all those lists of projects and credits, we identified 6.6 million credits from over 700 projects, and that represented 75% of the UN's offset portfolio for a decade between 2012 and 2022. 40% of these credits, so I think that's almost 3 million, came from renewable energy projects, specifically wind and hydropower. And then when we cross-referenced the types of projects we saw in our data with just what the conventional wisdom is about certain types of projects, we used the carbon offset guide. We saw that more than half of them are likely to not reduce emissions. So can you judge additionality just based on the project type? I always want to give the UN the benefit of the doubt. I don't know. I read several reports from Carbon Market Watch, and I looked at the methodology used on research. For instance, the report you all did about the World Cup, and it seemed like judgments were being passed just based on the type of projects they were. Like it was the Gulf Run mechanism that offset the World Cup, and I think the main critique was that most of them came from renewable energy. So we applied a similar critique, but we went a little bit further. We took the names of the projects and we supplied them to this ratings agency called B0. Most of the credits we found were not rated by B0, but 300 were, and 60% of these were rated either low, moderately low, or very low likelihood of achieving reductions. So 300,000 out of 6.6 million, that's not a lot, but they only rated 300,000, and most of them were rated low. We also found some of the UN agencies gave us data on how much they spent on each credit, and on average, it was $1.30. Is that, Sascha, is that good? Is that a good amount to pay for a credit?
Well, they negotiated very well. They paid almost nothing.
Yeah,
But
exactly.
so if the purpose is to pay as little as possible, it's very good. If the purpose is to do something for the climate, probably not.
Right. That's what we thought also. So and some really significant UN agencies were paying as little as 12 cents to offset a metric ton of carbon dioxide. So one of our sources again said the reason they're so cheap is because they're not genuine. Okay, and aside from whether these projects really have any impact on the atmosphere, on reducing greenhouse gases, we found other problems with them. 13 of them, just by looking them up online and seeing if there was any existing reporting on them, 13 of them were linked to displacement, environmental damage, and health concerns. So here's a few of those 13. If you look at the bottom right, one of them is called the smelliest landfill in history. Several of them in China were involved in displacing thousands of people. The number 4 on the top right was to build that hydropower plant. They had to blow up a sacred indigenous site. And if you look at a time lapse of that section of the Amazon rainforest, since it was built, you see a lot of deforestation. One of them, this is a pretty notorious project that has been reported on a lot, the Okla waste to energy plant. It's in a New Delhi neighborhood, and it's been spouting toxic fumes over this neighborhood for years. And it's been reported on not because it's an offsetting project, just because it's really harmful to the local community. But what we found is that for years, the UN has been buying credits from this project to be able to claim that it's climate neutral. And this article that I have a screenshot here, he used to live in that neighborhood. He moved because he couldn't handle the air quality, but he was part of a movement to try to get the try to either shut down this waste to energy plant or get it to actually produce energy in a clean way. And he found that the technology that it claims to use, which is supposed to convert a certain type of waste into into energy, doesn't exist. They didn't ever install this certain type of machinery that would allow it to produce a lower emission type of energy. And air tests in the area were found to contain very high levels of dioxins and other toxic particles. And they're challenging this waste energy plant in the Supreme Court. And again, the UN is offsetting its emissions through that waste to energy plant. We didn't get much of an answer when we brought our findings to UNFCCC and the other entities. All the UN entities said, well, we didn't choose these credits. UNFCCC chose them for us, and UNFCCC said we believe in our standards. They follow the CDM standards. And then when they put out their latest Greening the Blue report, it came with this statement that said that they again are almost 90% climate neutral, and their criteria haven't, and their system of procuring credits hasn't changed. And then when they released that, we did another story asking them, why didn't you change anything since we told you that so many of your credits are likely to not reduce emissions? And they said that they believe in the clean development mechanism. But there were some UN entities that took our findings seriously, and at least one said that they've taken note of our findings and we're consulting with UNFCCC on how to improve their offsetting initiatives. I don't have the details on that yet, but it's something I'm following up on.
May I ask you, Jacob, I'm so sorry, I have the very difficult role to do the timekeeping. Do you think it's possible to wrap up in 1 minute?
I think this is the last slide.
Perfect.
Yeah. So, but yeah, one final maybe positive thing that resulted from our investigation was that federal prosecutors in Brazil used our reporting to recommend that carbon credits not be traded in Brazil anymore. And that's it.
Thank you so much. It's quite a compelling investigation. Of course, we did not, as Climate Action Accelerator, we were very interested by your investigation. I think what it shows is that we're looking at UN-wide decarbonization frameworks, and that specific organizations may have or have not actually within the UN system understood all the implications of these UN-wide frameworks. Just also would like to acknowledge that some of the humanitarian organizations inside the UN, like WFP, UNICEF, HR, and others, are doing a lot to try and really move the sustainability agenda forward. But as we saw from your investigation, from the offsetting perspective, we really need an adjustment of these UN-wide frameworks. Okay, so without further ado, we're going to switch to the conversation. There is so many questions that are being raised by what we heard. I would like to ask maybe the first follow-up question, and then we'll turn to the question in the Q&A and to, I think Victoria had raised her hand. Yeah, okay. But maybe I'll do the first follow-up questions, because what's striking is what we heard. I mean, you said it, Sascha, it's most of the offsets bought are junk, basically, and low quality, low prices. They can be used for greenwashing. They are being used for greenwashing. And what we hear, you say that for the private sector, and what we heard from the example of the UN is that it's kind of the same implications in a different sector as well. So, Inigo helped us really understand the market, how it's regulated today, and what are the main features of the market. So what I want to ask is, why is it not more regulated? Is there actually a way that the voluntary market can be better regulated in terms of the prices, in terms of the quality, and to make it a more effective tool? Or at the end of the day, is it an outdated tool that cannot really meet the expectations in terms of being an effective climate tool? because the proportion that you told us in terms of basically 90% of it is not meeting the target are extremely important. So can it be reformed? Should it be reformed, or is it outdated? So who would like to get started?
Inigo, would you like to start, and then I can complement?
Yeah, I think it's a very interesting question. The fact that it's a voluntary market, so nobody has to do anything, means that, and it's also an international market, means that it's very difficult to be able to regulate such a market, right? That's the first thing. It is true that since the CDM days and the way that it's evolved, that there has been more measures, more frameworks that have been introduced, like the ICVCM and the VCMI, which have led the market to become more regulated in itself, right? Trying to aspire for this narrative of being higher quality, right? As well as within the standards who are trying to reform themselves into pushing for better methodologies, better requirements within their systems, right? And so I think that, yeah, I think the really important way to look at it, I think there's an underlying systemic design flaw with the way that carbon credits are being generated. I think that's one of the biggest things to take into account is that when you make such an absolute claim as to 1 ton of CO2 being 1 carbon credit, and then there's a huge amount of uncertainty when you are estimating carbon credits, and that uncertainty needs to be taken into account. But the way that the market functions in a way where there's a huge amount of competitiveness between project developers to issue credits to be able to get enough climate finance towards their project, right? And so because each carbon credit goes for, and it goes for such a absolute price, it leads on, because of the competitiveness, for those project developers to lower their prices of carbon credits, right? To be able to get enough climate finance to the project. However, once you do that, you are not taking uncertainty into account. You're not being conservative with your estimates. You have an incentive to overcredit. And then you are undermining environmental integrity, right? And so I think that it is in a way dated, and we've tried to reform and tried to be able to implement change, and we have been trying, right? But we come across this narrative of trying to scale the market. But when we have so many underlying flaws and there's a fundamental design flaw, we can't look past that. And so that's what my personal opinion, as well as Carbon Market Watch's, is that it's the eventual, therefore, use of the carbon credits, right? If I'm using a carbon credit that is being generated and that it has like such a design flaw, if I'm using that to be able to compensate, right, and make an absolute claim as to I am carbon neutral, I am net zero, where I'm purchasing credits that don't substantiate that, okay, along with all the quality problems which Sascha and Jacob have mentioned, then we have a bit of a flaw.
Absolutely. Sascha, go ahead.
If I can add to that, we have actually a little bit more than a bit of a flaw. It's actually huge, and the reason is that you cannot fix systemic structural problems with a voluntary market. That's probably the most fundamental reason. We can talk a little bit later what a net zero world would look like, but it will look very different from today's world. And it is even hard for many people to imagine what it would look like, because much of what we learned, for example, to try to explain the world through money doesn't work in such a world. But just perhaps at a company level, if you want to do something good for the climate, you need to stop emitting. So you need to stop emitting directly, and you need to stop emitting indirectly. That means from your supply chain. So you need to work very closely with your suppliers to emit less. And if you do less and less and less emissions every year, with some reasonable rate of reduction of perhaps 5 or 10% every year, you're doing pretty well for climate action. Anything outside of that is becoming much more problematic. So, for example, you could try to channel your money and help someone outside of your chain, but that is almost corporate philanthropy. It should not be really counted towards your own net zero. So if you want to help someone do something good, and you're convinced that there is that person is doing something good, then of course that's a good thing, but it's not part of your net zero. You're just helping someone else. So that's just a general comment. We can talk a little bit later if you want, if anyone is interested, on the topic of really how do we really reach net zero.
That would be a great follow-up theme indeed. Jacob, would you like to comment on that question, or maybe also on the question that was addressed by Nora in the chat? So Nora is our colleague from the REG project. She writes, what would you recommend for the UN to change concretely? For instance, could they assign persons to specifically select credits with a higher rating, or is there a way to automatically only select higher rated credits, subpool better credits, etc.? So if you'd like to address this question, and maybe also Inigo, there were two initial questions during your presentation from Paula and another participant on carbon credit prices not being standardized and about mechanisms in the VCM. So you would like to address them just after Jacob? That would be super helpful. Thank you.
Sure, I can try. Again, not as an expert, but just based on what I learned doing this reporting, I think it's good. It's very difficult because the UN itself the UN itself doesn't control where energy comes from. And if energy from less emitting sources don't exist, then they can't use them. But I get the ultimate goal is to emit less, to emit zero. If they can't do that, which is very difficult, and it is difficult because most of the emissions I think come from peacekeepers, and I don't know, I can't think of a way that they could not use any fossil fuels, but hopefully it will be possible soon. But let's say they have no choice but to keep offsetting. I guess they could search for the highest quality credits, but those are going to be like 100 times more expensive. So instead of spending roughly $10 million to offset emissions for 10 years, it's gonna be $1 billion. And are they going to spend that much just to say that they're 90%, 97% climate neutral? It's very, very costly. And the question of doing it automatically, well, the way they do it automatically now is through the clean development mechanism. And I don't think those high quality credits are available through the CDM. Doesn't seem like it.
If I can chime in before handing over to Inigo, thank you so much, Jacob, because we're having this conversation with the UN as well, and what we're also suggesting to them, Nora, is that there is an urgent revision of the 2007 boundaries and the sustainability strategy, the 2019 strategy. So these are these UN-wide frameworks that actually encourage very strongly to reach quickly net zero goals. And doing so with offsetting. So we need to give guidance and to provide support to UN entities, those willing, and I know there's a lot in the humanitarian sector that are willing to do the right thing, so that these UN-wide frameworks provide them space and guidance to have a better approach to offsetting, definitely. Inigo, over to you.
Yeah. I think the fundamental reason why there is no standardized price is because it's decentralized, right? There's no governing body which is putting and governing over what a price would be, like you would have in like the EU ETS, right? And so therefore it's dependent on the different characteristics, the heterogeneity of different carbon credits. Therefore that influences, well, that's one of the aspects that influences pricing. So the characteristics of where specifically what type of project type it is, where specifically is it located, what time frame, when was it issued? So when credits were issued in the past, they were used poorer methodologies, which have now evolved and been better. They've become more robust and with stricter rules and requirements. And demand, right? Demand for specific project types and specific things that, like, for example, forestry projects tend to be bundled with sustainable development goals, as well as with regards to hitting biodiversity impacts as well, which make them more of a premium and more desirable carbon credit. So I think those are some of the main reasons. If Sascha also has anything to add to that.
No, I'm just very happy that you mentioned biodiversity, because our big problem is actually biodiversity. Climate is a big problem, but biodiversity is a bigger problem, and this is not yet in the public discourse and public awareness.
I agree.
Thank you. Let me maybe now just follow up on one of the points that you mentioned earlier, Sascha, like at the end of the day, how do we reach net zero? And as we discussed when we were preparing for this webinar, there is an ongoing debate actually, and debates are very healthy in our in the larger climate community that was started with within the Science-Based Target Initiative, as to whether offsets could be actually used as a tool to abate emissions over which organizations have little influence. For instance, tier 3 emissions from procurement or beyond tier 3. Of course, again, SBTi and other organizations have been very clear that we need to prioritize reducing direct and indirect emissions. But then, of course, there's not this larger conversation for an organization when you look at the raw material and beyond, if I may say, how can we have an impact on that, and whether offsets can actually be a tool. So I would like to again, it's a conversation for now, at least at Climate Action Accelerator. We don't have a position, and I know many actors are still debating, but would you see from this perspective of the three of you that offset would be could be effective climate tools to accelerate the decarbonization of these scope 3 emissions? And how does this conversation impacts the way we see achieving our net zero goals?
The short answer is no, but
go ahead. Let's open the conversation.
right. So first of all, in a net zero society, we need to distinguish what are the different activities we do as a society. So we produce food, we produce and maintain and operate houses, and so on. We have some kind of education, we have some kind of social activities, etc. So these are different activities. And some of these activities can be significantly improved so that they don't emit and have any bad impacts, and others cannot. So for those that can be significantly improved, let's improve them and we can continue doing them. For the others that cannot be improved, they need to stop. So if flying can be improved significantly by, say, 2 or 3 orders of magnitude, which of course we cannot do, but if we could do that, we could continue flying. If that is not possible, we must stop flying. And perhaps in 3 centuries, we will have airplanes that use something completely different that we can't imagine today, and then we can restart flying. But in the meantime, for those 3 centuries, let's stop flying. And we can make an exception for humanitarian flights, and we can make an exception for distributing urgent vaccines, and so on, for evacuation. But then we have a few % of the airplanes that we have now. And there is no other way. Basically, offsetting is not going to help in any way. And of course, companies and public authorities have perfect control over scope 3 emissions. They can decide to buy the stuff, or they can decide not to buy the stuff. And if that stuff cannot be decarbonized, then they must stop buying the thing. So luckily, the most important things, such as producing food, can be almost completely decarbonized. And those things, cars cannot be decarbonized. We probably should not have many cars in the future and not use them very much. And similar for airplanes and so on. And then for things that are somewhere in the middle, we need to see in terms of healthcare, certain aspects have a very high cost and mixed impact, and others have a very big impact and smaller environmental cost. And of course, we cannot have a universal policy to get to net zero for every sector. We can have principles, but then of course, decarbonizing every sector is a little bit different. I have worked on several sectors myself. I haven't worked on others. So of course I can't speak about them. So first of all, companies and public authorities who do procurement have a lot of control over what they do. Second, a net zero society will stop many activities. Otherwise, we'll not get to net zero. Third, avoidance credits are completely useless in the sense that if I pay someone not to cut down the forest, then I still emit. and the forest is perhaps kept standing, and that is good. But we need to prevent people from cutting down the forest by all means we have as a society. And if I'm an emitter, I still need to stop emitting. We need to do both. So that really only leaves removal credits. And removal credits are fine if the quality can be assured, but the quantity of these credits is extremely limited. So realistically, we cannot do much more than 5 to 10% of our today's emissions. And then the question is, who should get those 5 or 10%? And should it be the richest guy? Should it be the company with the biggest staff of lobbyists? Or should it be the socially most useful activity? I would vote for the second one. And if you do that, that means for most of the companies that are on our list of biggest corporate buyers, there will be no offsets, no removal offsets left, because these are not the socially most important activities, even though these companies are quite rich. So this is kind of the big picture, but of course, it's not a matter of me or any other scientist saying that. What we need to do is to bring these elements into the public debate, into the public discourse, and have some collective discussion about if we can have removal credits for 5% of those of emissions today, which 5% of today's activities deserve to get them. And that should be a democratic decision. I hope this makes sense. I hope this is
It
not
does. It does make a lot of sense. I mean, especially I'm thinking of our audience, as we mentioned earlier, we're people from the humanitarian sector, from education, from health, so really working in areas where we deliver services to populations, which are extremely important socially. And indeed, that's one of the conversations that animates very much our sector. Like, should we ask the same to a humanitarian organization delivering food aid in the Horn of Africa in the midst of the worst famine that they have, or and ask the same from that organization to as we ask to Shell or to another large company. So I think it's really interesting what you're saying in terms of having universal policies, but also differentiating by sectors and having some sort of.
If just you allow me one sentence.
Of course.
So of course, the humanitarian sector, just as health, just as education, should have much higher priority than aviation or clothing or basically any kind of consumption stuff. But that doesn't mean that humanitarian sector can do whatever it wants.
Of course.
And probably within each sector, including humanitarian, education, health, there are huge differences. And some things have a big impact and mixed outcomes, and other things have a much smaller impact and a much better outcome. And it's within each sector to see what is meaningful. So even the humanitarian sector will need to reduce its footprint by X%, and X will be the result of some kind of societal dialogue. And then within those X%, it is for the humanitarian sector to decide in itself what is having the biggest impact and what can we improve.
Thank you. You speak my mind. Thank you so much, Sascha, for clarifying that. I don't know if Inigo or Jacob would like to add to this question on reaching net zero and and that whether offsets are acceptable for that.
I think Sascha encapsulated it very, very well. I think just to be a little bit more of a specific with it is when we're talking about removals, we're talking about permanent removals, those that will be stored for the geological time frame, which is equivalent to the CO2 which is in the atmosphere, right? So those, okay. And so we're saying like, direct air carbon capture and storage and stuff like that. And there's not so much when it comes to like the natural carbon sinks. They need to be conserved, they need to be protected, but not for offsetting purposes. I think it's also good to clarify the use of the word offset. When you're saying that, I think that the problem with carbon credits is the way that they're being used. So they are being used for offsetting purposes, so to compensate for your emissions. But it doesn't necessarily mean that all the credits are actually bad. It's just for the actual use of them, right? And so from a credit point of view, they could be used as a way of being able to hit your beyond value chain mitigation, right? So it's beyond any operational decarbonization and compensating for those. It's actually adding an extra, as what Sascha said with regards to philanthropy. So adding climate finance towards those projects, which are deserving of finance, but it's just because of the systemic issue that makes them not adequate for offsetting purposes, but they could be used for the purpose of being able to, like, contribution model. Company can be able to contribute a certain amount of finance towards those projects, and without having to create a claim. Just to add a little bit of clarity with regards to that.
That's extremely helpful. Thank you so much. I think we have just a few more minutes with, and Sascha is going to leave us soon to go meet his students, his class. We have a last question online from Diana Hoffman. How do you ensure high quality of removal credits, as a lot of them are over-credited and well due, as well as due to complex methodologies? And I think also we had a question from Richard as well, that we can, Richard, if you'd like us to delve further into this question. I think it was already addressed by our speakers, but feel free to repost the question in the chat. Thank you. So how do you ensure high quality of removal credits?
Should I go? I'll go for a little bit and
Please.
stuff, and then maybe Sascha can add in. Yeah, it's the quantification aspect of things. Once again, what are we talking about? Are we talking about carbon sinks, natural sinks, or are we talking about, technological ones? They're different significantly. When it comes to natural carbon sinks, it's quite difficult. I think there's a lot of problems with regards, I'm going to repeat myself, when it comes to the quantification aspect of having the ability to be able to quantify CO2 and being taking into account uncertainty and being conservative with your estimates, right? And so that is a big problem that would influence quality, right? If you're not able to hit the narrative of guaranteeing that 1 ton of CO2 is a carbon credit, and then also problems with regards to permanence. I think permanence is another thing. Once again, I'm going to sound like a broken record, but making sure that you're storing CO2 for an equivalent time frame, that's of CO2 that's in the atmosphere. And it is known that from analysis of like RED Plus projects, for example, it's an avoidance project, but same criteria that it will face significant amount of risk, both from anthropogenic risks as well as from natural risk factors. And so, yeah, these things influence how quality metrics with regards to carbon credits are. And so it's difficult, right? I think Sascha can add in.
Yeah, thank you so much. Oh, go ahead, Sascha. And then we're just going to go for a last round of questions and closing remarks from the three of you, and we'll have to wrap up.
Okay, then I will be short. So of course I agree with you, Inigo. It's difficult and it's messy, and especially if you're storing carbon in ecosystems, it is particularly complex and messy because there's so many different layers. Now we need to be a little bit careful about what permanence means. Of course, ecosystems have been storing carbon for the last 450 million years at large scale, and before that at a small scale. So to me, 500 million years sounds like quite permanent. At least it's the same time scale as of course the geological cycle. But of course now there is a lot of uncertainty with the changing climate, with the biodiversity crisis, etc. So the question is, how do we create conditions so that those ecosystems will survive for sufficiently long time, and if they are damaged by some accident, that can be regenerated and restored. And we will have to do this messy thing, unfortunately, because technological carbon capture does not work. Direct air capture is completely anecdotal. It's basically a toy. And it's going to be a many decades, possibly more than a century before it scales to anything useful. Things like bioenergy with carbon capture and storage is very problematic. We don't really know how to do it properly without damaging anything in the process. So potentially we could do that, but we don't really know how to do it. There's not a single project that operates from the beginning to the end properly today in the world. So it's very hard to base the future and policy and bet our future on things that don't work properly today, not even at a small scale. So it doesn't mean that these things are impossible in the very long run, but I wouldn't count on them. We know how to do biological carbon capture, so capturing and storing carbon in ecosystems well, and it's very messy, and unfortunately we have to live with this messiness, and we need to learn collectively how to do this properly.
Thank you so much. With this, just would like to turn to the three of you in literally 30 seconds each. Is there a last word that you would like to share with our participants, including in terms of recommendations for organizations that are considering using carbon credits to support global neutrality? So any final words and recommendations for our participants? Inigo, starting with you, then Sascha and Jacob.
I think simply don't use carbon credits to offset. Focus on reducing emissions within your own value chain. Make that decarbonize, make that your priority. I would say that is the number one narrative. If you are going to be using carbon credits, don't use it for the offset purpose. Don't suggest that you are carbon neutral with them, because what does that really mean for all the aspects that we have elaborated on in this webinar, that there's a huge amount of issues with the carbon credits, and a lot of companies are facing a lot of allegations of being, like not having substantiated their claims. And I would, be cautious with regards to that and do your due diligence prior to purchasing anything.
Excellent summary of our conversation. Thank you so much. Sascha.
Yeah, thank you, Inigo. I don't really have advice to give you what you should do as an organization, but I would very much like to extend the invitation to a dialogue. So first of all, if anyone wants a dialogue with me or with my colleagues, let's connect via LinkedIn, or Sonia or Beatrice can give you my contact information. Secondly, even more importantly than dialogue with me, would be to start a dialogue within your own organization and your own stakeholders and your own partners around this. And I don't know what will come out of the dialogue, but if something interesting does, please let me know.
Sorry, I lost my mic. Jacob, last word to you.
I would echo the same thing Inigo said. The sources I spoke to during my reporting couldn't really comment on how the UN could stop emitting altogether, but what they could do is stop claiming to be climate neutral. If they want to invest in renewable energy, maybe that's fine, but they can't use it to claim that they're not having any impact on climate change. So and doing so is a form of misinformation potentially.
Thank you so much. Indeed, encouraging to more transparency and integrity in the reporting is extremely important. Thank you so much. Well, I'm so thankful. I learned so much. I would have loved to continue the conversation, but we need to wrap up. We need to release Sascha as well, who's going to be late for his class. If our participants have 1 more minute, we have a couple of information to share, and then we will close the webinar. So
I will thank everyone and say goodbye.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
And stay in touch very much, please.
Pleasure, Sascha.
Pleasure,
Bye-bye.
really. Bye-bye. So just would like to share just a couple of recent publications from Climate Action Accelerator. One is our sectoral decarbonization roadmap for the humanitarian sector. I think this speaks very much to what Sascha had said earlier. Each of the sector, even those who have, of course, a high human impact, they need to actually do the best they can in terms of reducing their emissions. So that's the purpose of this publication. And then the next slide, we have released, my colleague Sonia is the grand architect of that, a series of toolkits, so very, very practical, technical ways to reduce emissions from travel, from fleet, good office practices, etc. There are more to come, actually. So I really encourage organizations to go check these toolkits. They've been established based on a mix of established references, but also capitalizing on our work with our partners. So with this, I'm looking at Sonia. I think we're ready to close the webinar, right? Yeah, okay. So thank you so much. Feel free to reach out to the panelists. I think Sascha suggested that, but I'm sure Inigo and Jacob are happy to be in touch as well. Yeah, we're happy to continue that conversation. Thank you so much.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, guys. Really
Thank you,
appreciate
everyone.
organizing everything.
Thank you.
Thank you for being present. Thank you all. Have a good rest of the day. Bye-bye.
Pleasure, pleasure.